Hello, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of Oberlin Shansi, Anevarakum Vanakkam. Thank you for being with us this evening. I would like to extend a special welcome to our panelists, Dr. Bharathy, Dr. Janaki Rahman, Tom Pruiksma, and Dr. Sornam Sankar. Dr. Janaki Rahman is in India, joining us very early in the morning. So a special thank you to him for getting up so early to be with us. This evening, we will highlight our panelists' inspiring work to increase Tamil's accessibility through community mobilization, activism, education, and translation, and to understand their vision for the future of Tamil studies, both in and outside academia. Tonight's panel is part of a series organized to commemorate Shansi's 70 years of work in India. Over the years, Shansi has sent over 80 fellows to Madurai and brought more than 60 visiting scholars to the United States to live and work in the spirit of mutually beneficial cross-cultural exchange and engagement. And Shansi's work is not just limited to India. Shansi also sends fellows to Japan, China, and Indonesia for similar exchange experiences. You can find more details about Shansi and upcoming India 70 events on the Shansi website. My name is Jonathan Ripley, former Shansi Fellow and current Tamil preceptor at Harvard University. I went to Madurai on a Shansi Fellowship from 1997 to 1999, which was one of the most valuable experiences of my life. Madurai was completely different from anywhere I had ever been, and I absolutely loved it. Everything was so unfamiliar, from external things like food, landscape, and language, to the internal, such as concepts of time and space, relationships, and values. I learned how to live all over again, to bathe with a bucket, and also to make friends, to express emotion, and to unlearn my very American ways. Eventually, Madurai and Tamil culture became a second home. This experience of immersing in such a different culture and language challenged my assumptions and beliefs and taught me to listen more deeply. It opened my mind, and it also gave me a purpose. I'd fallen in love with Tamil language and left Madurai determined to find a way to keep Tamil alive in my work post-fellowship. From the moment I began learning Tamil, I was keenly aware of how often it gets left out, pushed aside, and dismissed. As many of you know, Tamil language learning remains undervalued and under-resourced, despite it being a UNESCO recognized classical language with over 80 million speakers worldwide, not to mention its vast literary tradition, which is a literal treasure trove spanning millennia. In Madurai, I remember noticing the stark contrast between the English and Tamil departments in colleges and universities, and how different they were in terms of resources, prestige, and the opportunities they offered students. I noticed this again when I applied to graduate school in the US and found only a handful of universities offer Tamil language instruction. I'm not the only Shansi fellow who's continued to work with the Tamil language after my fellowship. There's a strong legacy of Shansi India fellows who have found concrete ways to cultivate Tamil language and learning, or Kalvi, through their work. Lin Lindholm, who sadly passed away 2 years ago, is a great example of how one person can make lasting positive change for Tamil. Jim was an early Shansi fellow who has supported countless students of Tamil, myself included, through his teaching and his excellent introductory Tamil textbook, A Basic Tamil Reader and Grammar. Jim was a true champion for Tamil, and his legacy lives on in his students and the students who learn from his book. David Buck is another example. He has been publishing Tamil translations for decades, including an edited volume of Tamil Dalit writings in translation that I've used in some of my classes. The list of Shansi Tamil champions goes on. Joe Elder, Sam Sudananda, and Tom Pruiksma, who's here with us tonight, have all made substantive contributions to Tamil language and learning. Given this history, it is fitting that the focus of tonight's panel reflects this aspect of the Shansi spirit. All our panelists are dedicated to increasing the accessibility of Tamil to a wider global public across multiple sectors. This work is especially important given the significant need there is to make Tamil language more available through increasing study opportunities, creating language learning resources, and publishing more Tamil literature in translation. Our panelists all honor the importance of Tamil in their work and share its beauty and light with the world. Dr. Bharathy has taught and continues to teach Tamil to college and university students in India and the United States. She currently teaches at UC Berkeley, and I'm proud to say she's one of my Tamil teachers. Dr. Janaki Rahman has worked tirelessly to fundraise for Tamil professorships in institutions of higher learning around the world through large-scale community mobilization and advocacy. Tom Pruiksma shares Tamil through his beautiful translations, his most recent being his translation of Tiruvalluvar's Tirukkural called The Kural. And Tom has also published a Tamil language textbook called A Feast for the Tongue. And Dr. Sornam Sankar has built from scratch volunteer-run Tamil schools where hundreds of kids are learning Tamil in their own communities. I'm honored to moderate this discussion with people who are truly lighting the way for a brighter future for Tamil language and learning. The panel will work as follows. Each panelist will introduce themselves and speak for 5 to 7 minutes about their work with Tamil. And following this, I will ask a few questions of the panelists. Time permitting, we will allow for audience questions at the end. If you would like to submit a question, please do so through the chat function. And send your questions to our hosts, Gavin or Ted, and we will get to them time permitting. Without further delay, I will now turn it over to our panelists. We will begin with Tom Pruiksma, followed by Dr. Janaki Rahman, Dr. Bharathy, and then Dr. Sornam Sankar. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm Thomas Hitoshi Pruiksma, but my friends in Tamil Nadu and in Madurai call me either Tom or Tom Anna, Anna being the word for older brother, particularly in the village that I was able to live in and continue to have connections to. Like Jonathan, I was a recipient of the Shansi Fellowship, in my case in 1998. I went to South India because I was interested in living in a village and tasting what life in a rooted, rural, and integrated community feels like. And of course, to do that, I needed to learn how to speak Tamil, and I needed to learn how to speak it as well as I could. And I was blessed to find an extraordinary teacher in Dr. Kalvi Ramanujan, who was a professor at Saurashtra College, and who recently passed in 2019. And he not only helped me to learn how to speak, bringing me into the world of spoken Tamil, Petra Tamil, but he also was the sort of teacher who could light you up and get you excited about things you didn't realize you would be interested in. And in my case, he led me step by step into learning how to read and to write Tamil. He brought me into Tamil poetry, which proved to be a very important turning point in my own life because it reconnected me to my own love of language and of words. And so when I returned to the United States 2.5 years later, I returned to English with new ears and with a new heart, able to hear poetry in English in a new way. And that embarked me on a 20-year fellowship, apprenticeship to language and to poetry in Tamil, in English, in Spanish, and even in ancient Greek. In 2002, I was able to return to Tamil Nadu and to write with my Tamil teacher, A Feast for the Tongue. And then 2003 and 2004, I was lucky to get a Fulbright grant to study the relationship between land and language in Tamil Nadu and in Tamil language and literature. And as part of that year, I studied the classical Tamil masterpiece on ethics, power, and love, the Tirukkural, or in brief, the Kural, by the great poet Thiruvalluvar. And in fact, we studied a very particular edition. My Tamil teacher and I have it here with me. It was an edition which paired all of the verses, all of the 1,330 verses, with all of the major commentaries dating back to the 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. And so I was learning the language of the Kural. I was learning the language of these different commentators, each of whom has their own very distinct style. And I was also memorizing. I memorized maybe 700 of these verses. And I even learned how to write in the poetic form of the Kural. And in the years since, my teacher would say to me when I would go to visit him or when I would speak with him on the phone, he would say, "You know, Tom, wouldn't it be a good thing if somebody did a proper literary translation of Tirukkural? And I'd always say, of course, sir, I think that would be a wonderful thing for someone to do. And for years, it never occurred to me that this someone might be me until 2015, when out of somewhere, out of the blue, the thought came to me. I think at this point I had become solid enough in my practice as a poet in English to even dare entertain the idea of, well, maybe I could give this a try myself. And on the 1st of January 2016, I started translating one verse a day. And I mentioned this to my teacher maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, and he said, "Oh, good, you finally got the hint." Something that really struck me and still strikes me to this day is that although my teacher was always very keen to tell me exactly what he thought I should do or not do, he never once told me to translate this book, because I think as a poet himself, he understood that either it would occur naturally to me or not. And if it did, he would be there to help me. And so I returned to Tamil Nadu in 2017, read through the entire manuscript with my teacher, and had him push me to make my translation as solid as it could possibly be. And I'm delighted to say that in January of this year, Beacon Press in Boston published my translation of the Tirukkural. And in some ways, that feels like the end of a certain story. But in my case, it is also the beginning of another story. Because when I was working on this translation, I applied for a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. And I was astonished to discover in the process of researching to that proposal that at the time, this was 2016, 2017, there was not one single complete translation of the Qural into English in print in North America. Now, for contrast, another work of, I would say, equal stature and importance, the Tao Te Ching, had several dozens of translations in print. And just before this gathering, I looked on the public library catalog, and I just saw how many. There were 23 translations in the catalog, distinct translations of the Tao Te Ching. And so it strikes me that's really an astonishing fact, given the importance of Tamil as a living classical language. And so what began as a way to honor both my Tamil teacher and what he was able to share with me, and also what I learned from my friends in the village that I also was blessed to live in, and who embody many of the profound virtues and qualities that Tiruvallur describes with such beautiful poetic lines, that in addition to honoring them and what they were able to give me, what they were able to impart to me, I am also now involved in an effort to see that the Qural arrives at its rightful place on the shelves of bookstores, on the shelves of libraries, and on the shelves of homes of readers, both those who have a connection to Tamil Nadu and to those who may have never heard of the Tamil language, but who will resonate and respond to the wisdom that this work in particular has to offer us. I think perhaps more profoundly than ever. And I know that later on, Jonathan may be asking people to share favorite quotes if they have them, but I thought I'll just wrap up my introductory remarks with a verse on Kalvi, on learning, that may be useful to have in the air. This is verse 400, and I'll read the translation as well as the Tamil. Learning is sacred, unperishing prosperity. All other wealth is not wealth. Kedil virchelvam kalvi, oravarku madalla matrayavai. Learning is sacred, unperishing prosperity. All other wealth is not wealth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm excited to hear more quotes later. We'll now turn to Dr. Janaki Rahman.
Good evening. Taye Tamile Vanakkam. I'm Dr. Janaki Rahman, currently sitting in Chennai, trying to come tonight back to US. I've been in US since 1975, immigrated there as a physician. After further training in New York City and subsequently in Philadelphia, I started my cardiology practice in 1983 in Altoona, Pennsylvania, near State College. I've been practicing up until March 3rd this year, and I just retired. And I'm going to be just a part-time so that I could do more work on Tamil. That's my passion. And of course, you would like to know why I ended up in Tamil. I was originally supposed to read Tamil in Karandai, which is like a Harvard for Tamil, in Tamil Nadu, which is near Tanjavur. In my school days, in the state level, I was told that I got the 4th highest marks. So I was given a free scholarship to go and study there. But as Jonathan knows and people who visited Tamil Nadu knows, Tamil is not going to make you or uplift for a good job. So I was advised, you are studying well, why do you want to read Tamil? Then all you will be reading is poetry and facilitations and get nothing. Why don't you come to Chennai? I'll help you. And the man who told is a great Tamil scholar and great politician. And so I came, finished medicine, came 2 years, made a good living. But the same person once visited me and I told him why you didn't want me to study Tamil. And he said, sorry, it's not that he wanted not to study, but he wanted me to get economically strong. And he also told me, which is really very, very important point. Look at English, it's only 400, 500 years old. And when Shakespeare comes to London now and he speaks, nobody would understand. Look at Tamil, which is thousands of years old. When Thiruvalluvar comes today in Tamil Nadu or anywhere, if he speaks, 75% of what he says still people will understand. So what I meant by this, English language is not very strong compared to Tamil, but English people are very strong. Tamil is strong, but Tamilers are not strong because economically we are not. So he said, get yourself economically sound, then you could do whatever you want to the value that you think. I think it turned out to be the right. And then what was the next connection was in 2015, when I was traveling from Washington after some conference, I came across an article in Washington Post. I think it was sometime in May in 2015. Literary Society or something, they published an article. And there it mentioned there are 7,012 languages which is being written and spoken. Out of them, only 7 as classical languages, and Tamil is one of them. Of course, all of you know Greek, Hebrew, Sanskrit, and Arabic or Persian, and Chinese, so 7 of them. And I didn't know anything more than that at that point. I was so proud that, oh, wow, we are one of those classical languages, 1 out of 1,000, because 7,000 languages, we are one of those. But then in 2015, I attended a Federation of Tamil Sangams, which is around 50 Tamil organizations, and joined together in the July 4th weekend, and St. Louis, that was the year. At that time, I saw a lady by name Vaidehi, who is currently living in Hawaii, and she translated Sangha literature, that is 18 books, into English. I was amazed, not even 1 or 2, all 18 books translated in English. So I thought she will be a great professor. When I met her, she said she went to English convent. She didn't read Tamil in the usual way like you guys even did. But somehow when she found the greatness, she worked hard, and she was also working in the University of California, Berkeley, when Tamil chair was created 25 years back in a different capacity in administrative work. So she worked very hard and did this. And so I was so amazed and got all those books. Then I spoke with her a couple of times, and I was more amazed that he was not a Tamil professor or something. Then she told, why you keep bothering me? What do you want from me? I said, why don't you translate some of the science books in the villages so that the kids could read? They don't have an opportunity. Then she said, that is not needed right now. They have better facilities in Tamil Nadu. But if you want to do something for Tamil, why don't you do something in Harvard. What do you mean? Harvard is teaching all 6 classical languages, but not Tamil, which was a big news to me. I was really upset. Then I thought I should do something about it. And that also gave me the burning in my brain that my uncle told that I should do something for Tamil. I also found my father's father, was a childhood friend for Maraimalai Adigal, who is one of the greatest scholars in Tamil Nadu. And so I have so many letters written to my grandfather by him. So I thought, wow, we have such a connection. My grandfather himself was a great scholar, I was told by my uncle. So I should do something. So I contacted some people. It was a big, big steel curtain. And I ran into Dr. Witzel. I also ran into Dr. Parimal Patil. One good fortune for me, Dr. Parimal Patil is from State College, my neighboring town, born and raised. He's the head of the Department for South Asian Studies. And his parents, I know them as a cardiologist. So that gave me little entrance to talk to them and go to the Harvard and speak with a lot of people. And I was amazed how many layers of deans, this, that, and 6, 7 layers before I really have to meet Dr. Sorensen, who was in charge for all that. And during that conversation, I think she is a Brazilian lady. She was in charge for some studies there. And she questioned why you are so pushing for Tamil. Finally, after some nice conversation, I was ticked off and I said, you claim yourself as the best university, and we claim Tamil is one of the best languages, if not number 1, at least in the top 7. And you don't teach Tamil, then how can you claim that you are one of the best universities? That really made her shook up. She called the administrator and she went into more further studies and she said, yeah, we have to have a Tamil. Administrators, as usual, they said, there is no money, no mission. So they said, if you give the money, we will do it. So that was the first step. Then 6 months, the negotiation went on with half a dozen people. It started with $2 million, then went up to 3, 4, 5, finally 6. I had the feeling they just didn't want Tamil department, so they keep raising the price. The reason is, another scholar 10 years back went there to talk about it, they didn't even entertain. So he said, that's the reason they are doing it. I felt money is important, but money is not the only thing important. Okay, and you may also remember in Tirukkural, there are verses for mindset. If you want to do something, you could do anything if you keep on trying. Of course, I don't want to quote all those in Tamil, but Tom and everybody else could say, Vinaythitpum. So I really thought, okay, I'm going to do it. And if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? Not only I have a passion, I have the money, I have the people, and a lot of Tamil doctors and entrepreneurs are there in USA doing very well. In fact, I may even add, there are 2 Tamils who are the CEOs of the top 10 companies in the world. For Pepsi, Indra Nooyi, who is from Chennai, and Sundar Pichai Google is also from Tamil Nadu. I thought we are holding this, why not we get the money going? So that's the snag then I ran into. And Harvard told me, if you want to start, give me a seed money of $250,000 and $1 million within 30 days. I didn't know what to do. I thought of buying a Powerball, but I don't know that I will be so lucky. So then luckily, my good friend, my senior, Dr. Sambandam, who lives in Boston, he was ill, so I went and saw him. At that time, I told I had been negotiating with Harvard. He said, let's go. So we both went and met some other officials. We got the approval, and then we paid each $500,000, so $1 million. So we got the signed paper that they are willing to establish Tamil Chat. Then the real struggle started. Nobody knew about it. They felt that I'm an idiot, that I'm spending all my money. And my family, thank God, they didn't hate me, but they didn't think it was the right to start with. But my kids said, Dad, we both are physicians. We don't have any loans. You have raised us right. So you do whatever you want. My daughter even said, wow, maybe our children, grandchildren will get a seat in Harvard because you donated. So this is the way the conversation went on. My wife said, when she used to argue for anything, buying green car, this house. For this, she said, you're doing something useful to the society, go ahead. So that was a big blessing. So that's how our journey started. Then how to mobilize the rest of the people and get the money everywhere. They appreciated me, but no money was coming. Year and a half, 2 was gone. 3 years, we have to raise the money. I went to every Tamil Sangam in America. Every other weekend, I was free. Every other week, I have to work weekends in the hospital as we have only 2 partners. Somehow I journeyed almost some 40 meetings, and everywhere, some meetings, I spent more money to reach there in Texas, but I didn't even get the money that I needed back. But luckily what happened in Tamil Nadu, there was election was coming. Election manifesto is very important for them. Through some officials, I was able to make sure, and it was written in the election manifesto, the former Chief Minister Jayalalitha, item number 26, she will help Tamil all around the world to establish, specifically in Harvard, as there is a somebody is trying. So I made use of that paper when she won the election and became a chief minister, and approached, and she immediately said, okay, she will give $5 million. But the government officials who are supposed to facilitate is always a speed breakers, as you know. The bureaucracy came and said, anything you give out of the country, you cannot give more than 50%. So she changed it to $3 million. I thought that's not bad. So using that, I went around, first in Toronto. And in Toronto, when I went there, Mr. Appadure Muthulingam, who is a writer, called me. He was so excited, introduced the meeting. And I got a lot of encouragement, but no money. But they also asked me, we are 300,000 Tamils in Toronto. You are coming from America, rich country, asking money for us, and nobody is helping us to set a Tamil chair here. I promised at the time, Harvard is a big brand name. You may be 300,000 here, but going to Harvard has its own pride, brand name. They have been working 380 plus years. So they must be doing something right. So we have to go there and get a seat in that table. And I also told them there are 47 Nobel laureates, 48 Pulitzer Prizes, 37 or 32 heads of states like prime ministers and presidents have come out of that. So let's go and sit there. And then I promise I will do the Toronto. As I promised, once the Harvard chair was established, then I went to Toronto, joined with the Canadian Tamil Congress, and that was also established. We handed over the money for $3 million that they needed just several months back. They have the search committee to get the Tamil. So this is the journey. I'm doing the third and the last one, not the last, the latest one is in University of California, Berkeley. There is an established chair, all of you know, but the second position for lack of facilities, they were not sure how long to continue. And I didn't like that. So we negotiated, they agreed for 2 things, not only just $1 million, but more than that, they were willing to change the department's name to Aranjaranna Endowed Tamil Studies at UC Berkeley. The reason I was very particular about the name, Aranjaranna is not only a great scholar, and he is also a politician. He started a political party. Within 20 years, he started to become the chief minister. Unfortunately, he passed away at the age of 60. And he also changed the name of Madras state into Tamil Nadu. And in literature, including Bharathy, we used to call ourselves as Tamil Nadu. But when the Britishers came, it was changed to Madras state. So he changed it back. So I felt that should be named after him. So our children and grandchildren who are in USA will know who is Aranjaranna, what he has done. In Tamil Nadu, that's not a problem. Every other bridge, every other street, like you have in Martin Luther King, we have Aranjaranna. That's not an issue. So, but should be in America. So that has been done. And I'm in the process of collecting the rest of the money. And meanwhile, I also went to Cologne, where the Department of Tamil was 55 years, was supposed to be scrapped because it all depends on the dean or whatever the government funds. So I intervened. Tamil Chair Incorporated, which is a nonprofit in USA, gave $150,000 and stabilized the department for 2 years. And then government of Tamil Nadu heard this and they gave the rest of the money last year. So the department is going to be continued for 3 years. And I said the Europeans there, hey guys, you have to start, you have all those Tamil programs, all you do is bring the cine stars and have a good time every summer. You have to pitch in, start like we did, and then I will help you. If you come up with half the money from any university that you want to establish, the other half Tamil chair will go around the world and get it. And for Tamil chair in Harvard, it's surprising, 35 countries people sent, all the Tamils who are working. And the highest money was the government of Tamil Nadu, 1.5 million. Me and Dr. Sambandam, 500,000. The last one in the list in the web says is a 56 cents. Why am I bringing that? That lady who was selling street vendor vegetables, she gave 50 rupees. I want to be part of it. So we put that name, that comes to $0.56. So Tamil belongs to everyone. Everyone should pitch in. That 50 rupees is a day's living. For me, I make a few $1,000s a day as a top cardiologist, but that is my own day. So everybody should share, and that's how we are journeying. And I thank personally for Tom for doing the work, and Jonathan, who has been a very good friend and teaching Tamil for a lot of people, and rest of the panel, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Janaki Rahman, and thanks to you for all your great advocacy and fundraising. I will now turn to Dr. Bharathy.
Vanakkam. I am Bharathy Sankara Rajulu. I am a lecturer in the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies, UC Berkeley. Thank you so much for having me as one of the panelists. It's indeed my pleasure to be a part of the celebration of Oberlin Shansi 70 years in India event. I appreciate the effort that you have taken this opportunity to kindle our thoughts of cultivating Tamil Kalvi and promoting Tamil studies in North America. I started my career in Madurai with the American Institute of Indian Studies almost 3 decades ago, teaching Tamil to researchers and students, especially from the US. And today, I'm proud to see many of them who still continue working in Tamil language and literature. I'm glad that Ted, Tom, and John, who I know from Madurai, are involved in this event. At this moment, I remember what one of my students at Berkeley said. She said she wanted to learn Tamil as she was inspired by her brother who studied Tamil with Jonathan. When she got to know that Jonathan studied Tamil with me, she thought she shouldn't miss the opportunity to take Tamil lessons at Berkeley. Thanks, John, for being an inspiration to this generation. What else can I say other than the Thirukural? ஈன்ற பொழுதில் பெரிதுவக்கும் தன் மகனை சான்றோன் என கேட்டதாய். I am very proud of you, John. I started my college education with math as the major subject, and my family also thought I'd pursue my higher studies in math. But I realized at some point I had a passion for Tamil literature and decided to switch from math to Tamil. Luckily, my parents did not put pressure on me to pursue a degree like math or science. Thanks to my parents, especially to my father, who was a great Tamil scholar, and to all my teachers who made me who I am today. When I think of the topic for today's discussion, I also think of many schools and universities that provide opportunities for learning Tamil for children and adults living in different states in America. The state seal of biliteracy for high school graduates and various fellowships available at the university level are the ones that definitely give opportunities for younger generation for learning Tamil. Many students come forward to learn Tamil at different levels as they get official credits for Tamil studies. These opportunities provide them with language learning environment rather than language acquisition. I here would like to insist that Tamil instruction should focus on developing language learners, language skills in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The increasing development and advancement of technology is an advantage to cultivate interest in younger generation to understand the subtleties and nuances of Tamil language and literature in many ways. Recently, I had an opportunity to witness the project presentation of the students of International Tamil Academy on Kiradi excavations. They did amazing presentations on this excavation. The interest and involvement they showed in presenting models on Kiradi excavation show this generation's vast knowledge of understanding Tamil tradition, culture, and language and life. I was told that students gain knowledge through interacting with archaeologists and other experts who are involved in Kiradi excavations via Zoom. This is a great example to show ease of access to technology is a boon for language learners who are oceans apart. They have proved live interaction with resource persons breaks the monotony of learning and also help them to be more spontaneous. I also would like to mention the major difference that I noticed between learning Tamil in Tamil Nadu, India, and also in the US is the community interaction. When students go to India for language learning, they had to interact with people on day-to-day basis. On the other hand, when they learn the language in the US or anywhere outside of Tamil Nadu, India, they get very less or no opportunities for community interaction, and they hardly get to use the language outside the classroom. Tamil schools and various Tamil associations play a vital role in developing interest in Tamil language and literature to this generation, providing them to so many opportunities like participating in Thirukural, oratorical, and many other competitions. Nandri.
Thank you, Dr. Bharathy. Now we'll turn to Dr. Shankar.
Vanakkam. Thank you, Ted and Jonathan, and also Shansi for the nice opportunity. Unlike the others, I am not a contributor for Tamil language or the community, but I wanted to present more from the perspective of Tamil schools, which actually the grassroots movement in the US now. So I will do an overview of the school and start with my introduction. I am associated with Ellicott City Tamil School, which is called Talent Tamil School. And I am one of the founders, and I'm also the head. And the school is functioning in Maryland, Ellicott City, Maryland, and on Friday evenings. And I'm also a Tamil representative in the coalition of community-based heritage language schools, which is actually a national-wide initiative established by American University in Washington, D.C. And on the personal front, I immigrated to the US in 1990 as a postdoctoral scientist in Johns Hopkins University. And then I, decided to do a science master's and switch to IT industry so that I could spend more time doing activities like. Now I am working full-time as an architect in Bank. All my leisure hours go to Tamil language. Now go to the next slide, please. So I will just show some pictures and present about the Tamil schools. In Tamil language, in North America alone, there are about 100 Tamil schools, priced about almost 20,000 students learning in various states. For example, in Washington, D.C. alone, we have five Washington metro area, 5 Tamil schools, with students ranging from 200 to 600. And all these schools are completely 100% volunteer run. They are tax exempt organizations, and only parents form these schools, and they are almost like a really great model for a community-based school. And, in the path, we also formed a few academies. We have about 4 academies. For example, I have listed 3 of them here, like AITL, American Language, and American Tamil Academy, and International Tamil Academy. These are organizations, again, volunteer run, 100% nonprofit. They, cater to the academic needs of the schools, providing, curriculum, books, and for example, in I have listed some of the books from AITL. AITL is an organization which actually like an open source community recently started, and so all these schools follow one of these, the syllabus or book. And recently, we also have the seal of biliteracy, just going through almost every state. In high school diploma, the students were able to seal of biliteracy Tamil, and this actually inspired a lot of children and parents to be part of the Tamil. And 2 organizations like ACTFL, American Council on the Foreign Languages, and the Tamil Virtual Academy. They are the the bodies conduct exams. For example, ACTFL conducts oral proficiency testing in the US, and Tamil Virtual Academy conducts the examinations for proficiency. To give a perspective about the schools, and this is kind of a model that we follow in our school, but I would say most of the big schools are pretty much similar. We have like a kindergarten level Malalai, and then about 10 levels, almost like a match with the public school grades. And various levels we teach, starting from alphabets, words, sentences, and then ultimately grammar, and then take exams from the TVA for biliteracy. In some schools, they follow different requirements into their state requirements. And in very few cities, like in Virginia or New Jersey or California, where Tamils are living in large numbers, there are even credits the county schools are providing, county Board of Education is providing, so they can actually substitute their second language with Tamil as a second language. We also, have most of these classes, they are conducted during the weekends. For example, our classes are on Fridays, and some schools they have on Tuesday, Saturday, or Sunday. Except during the spiritual last 2 years, it's completely different scenario, but mostly in the weekend. And some schools also operate in the system. For example, in Virginia, they are not able to fit in one set shift. They have to. So it's a real, large number of parents participate in these. For each level, we have about 2 teachers, and then there are parent volunteers, and in addition, there are other volunteers who go in the background. Can you go to the next slide? In addition, the schools also have a lot of large-scale events. For example, we have annual day, and as mentioned, that some competitions, and we have poster sessions. Similarly, here we had a teacher training session, and in fact, Jonathan Ripley was one of our trainer when he came to our school. He was talking to all the kids, inspiring them by language. All these efforts require a lot of volunteers. So, mostly parents volunteer in one or other roles. Can you go to the next slide? And there are also cultural programs that we keep the students very interactive with the community. For example, every city as a Tamil Sangam, where it provides platform for farming cultural activities in kids or singing, dance, etc. And a lot of students and the parents, they are interested in creating some kind of cultural activity. They also volunteer and the students. And this is not just in our school, it's almost, you can see that in every city, major city in the US. Next slide, please. Okay. So as I mentioned about the biliteracy seal, which is the new thing which is introduced in school. In our school, we have children already graduated with the biliteracy skill in diploma for Tamil, and we have that now. So this is one of the inspiration for the children also to get motivated. And similarly, we also have is providing aid system. You can go to next slide, please. Okay. So the one thing that I want to finally mention about here is the enthusiasm or the motivation where the parents get to it. In fact, unlike any other organizations, Tamil schools are really giving us. There are few important things. One, parents want their children to talk to their parents or grandparents when they visit their homelands, whether it's Tamil Nadu or Sri Lanka or Malaysia. And then the second thing, parents themselves, identify themselves as Tamils because they think Tamil is the oldest language. The pride really is forward. And as Dr. Janaki Rahman mentioned that in his lecture, when we were growing up in Tamil Nadu, we were all advised to, read science and technology or get degree in science technology and make our economical life better. So we didn't really have a chance to study Tamil, even though we loved Tamil, reading and writing Tamil. So that's one thing that we use as an opportunity now, at least to teach our children, and on the in the process we also learn Tamil. And the third thing that many parents used to tell that they also feel is a community feeling. When the children, they come to school, this is the place where they identify with the other children who have common heritage, and they can freely try to talk their own mother tongue, or they can perform their culture, which they don't really feel identified with their regular schools. So, and some of the students, they really have friendship that really lasts long until when they grow up adults. So it also helps them. And then the last motivation is recently all the credit system, which is coming over. And one thing that Jonathan, he used to ask us always, why the motivation for learning a language is so low. It's because there is no economic or political benefit for they don't see it. And you can see when National Spelling Bee, most of the kids are now, you can see that a lot of Tamil kids, even if you ask them, they may not even know the Tamil words, right? So I think that's one of the things that Dr. Janaki Rahman is doing, making Tamil being taught in universities and higher learning. So once the opportunities are there in college, probably more and more students will come forward and Tamil. And Tamil schools really provide the initial foundation for this, and we are happy.
Thank you very much, Shankar. So we'll now transition to a few questions for our panelists. Feel free to, if you have any burning questions or questions at all, to type them into the chat and direct them to Gavin or Ted, and they may find their way to me. In the meantime, I have a couple of questions for our panelists. I'm so inspired listening to all of you after my sort of grim introduction that laid out the the dearth and lack of opportunities for learning Tamil and the need for resources, it's heartwarming and inspiring to hear your examples of real work in the world at different levels promoting Tamil Kalvi. And it's really wonderful. So kudos to all of you and your hard work. I'll start with a quick question for Shankar about advocacy with public schools, and if students are actually getting credit or recognition within their schools for the Tamil work they're doing at weekend school. And also if, and this is a kind of a second question, if the Tamil schools are networked into larger organizational bodies because you're obviously developing so much content and systems that could be so valuable.
Yes, so I mean, I already mentioned that there are already 2 or 3 academies that we formed ourselves are taking forward in curriculum. And one thing that I had to say, we in the beginning, all of us, we all started around like 2000, most of people here. We started with books from Tamil Nadu. Didn't really help because it's caters to the Tamil language. And then we took some books from the University of Chicago and University of Pennsylvania. I mean, they are great as a second language tools. Then there is something lacking because they are all made for university students. But we start with young children, from starting from grade 1. So we couldn't really use those materials. So that is the reason we, joined together and pulled our resources, and we are still learning. I would say that even Dr. is involved in preparing the lessons for even American Tamil Academy. It's not the problem with the school system is each level you'll see students completely at spectrum of skill level. It's very hard to come up with the single. But however, the literacy seal or the credit system really helps now to standardize, because whenever it is, you have to take this exam so that means you have to force yourself to fall into a different level, and so that way this is really helping. And all these advocacy work really helped. For example, in our school, when we wanted to get to the bilateral seal, we had to talk to the local board of education, and through our political that one of the reason actually we are also participating in the violation of community-based schools in Washington DC, in American University. That actually gives the share our efforts, knowledge, how to do advocacy work to reach out the board of education. So that way this is helping.
And do the kids know about the existence of the Harvard Tamil Chair and these other chairs that are formed?
In fact, when we were raising funds for the Harvard, I know that when you came to 2 or 3 of our schools to fundraiser, even one school alone raised about $50,000 for Tamil in Virginia. So I mean, so that actually really helped, and especially, I mean, Jonathan, most people, most children know about it. So even your videos are popular, and so Harvard Tamil Chair is definitely very well known. And now that also has given the pride for the children, because children usually disregard whatever the parents say. I mean, you just brag because it's your language. After the Harvard Chair came into existence, the students really, appreciate maybe, our language is really oldest language, so they acknowledge now. So Harvard has acknowledged.
Thank you. Harvard being the thought leader that it is, I just think it's an important example that does seem to be having an effect and making change. I'm going to turn to Tom now. Tom, I had a question about, that we have the personal experience of relishing Tamil through translation. I was curious if you could share thoughts about the potential for translation, Tamil literature and translation to affect change and mindsets on a wider level, kind of as we've talked about. You know, there's lagging interest and not a lot of resources allocated. Do you see potential there?
That's a great question. For me, I think it's interesting to think about, for instance, the situation particularly with the children of immigrants of whatever kind. I mean, in my own experience, my mother's family came originally from Okinawa, but my mother grew up. My grandparents would speak to them amongst themselves in Japanese, but they never spoke to my mother in Japanese, and I lost a certain connection there because of cultural ideas about, you know, we want to be as American as possible and speak English as well as possible, which of course is a noble goal. I think that in the case of Tamil and Tamil literature, that because the literature is so extraordinary and has such riches to it, that one role that outstanding translations of that work can play in this larger cultural work is by bringing attention to the language among the general reading public, if you will. So that just as I was mentioning before, just as people know about, say, the Tao Te Ching or the Bhagavad Gita or the poetry of Rumi, that people will come to know, oh yes, and there's also this great work, the Koro, which is a work of ethics and poetry and about power and about love and about a very embodied and nitty-gritty approach to practicing wisdom in everyday life. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people, including scholars of religious traditions, religious leaders, as well as healers and other figures. And I've been having dialogues with people, and they'll say, I had no idea this book existed, and it says so much to me. It resonates so deeply with my own, whether it's a philosophical tradition, a spiritual tradition, a religious tradition. And so my hope is that as works of Tamil literature enter into a more general public awareness, that that changes, if you will, the ecology, or that changes, if you will, the landscape. So for instance, students, and I've had actually a number of people write to me who their parents are from Tamil Nadu or from Sri Lanka, and they grew up in the United States, and they wanted to be good Americans and get along with their friends, and maybe they studied some Tamil, or they were sort of interested but sort of embarrassed by it because none of their friends had heard about it. And then they would get into their 20s and they'd think, you know, there's this rich, extraordinary rich language that I have a direct connection to. And they find themselves wanting to reintegrate that into their experience, to study or to read or to be able to share, for instance, works of Tamil literature with their English-speaking friends. And so my hope is that a translation such as this one and other translations can help to widen that context, to widen that conversation, so that people are like, oh yeah, I've heard about that language. Maybe I'll even learn it myself because I'd like to take it from the original.
Thank you. Yeah, Shankar, in our conversations about the children and how their interest kind of flags, kind of wanes as they get towards the teenage years, I'm thinking maybe a good translation of the Koro would be a way to kind of bring them back into a feeling of motivation to keep going with their Tamil studies. Yeah,
that's correct.
And Dr. Bharathy, turning to you, I was just curious about your love for Tamil. Like, what is your favorite aspect of the language that drew you in when you made the decision to devote your life to the language? And is it really as difficult as everybody thinks?
You know, it's really difficult to say this is the favorite aspect of the language that I like. But I could say the favorite aspect of my Tamil language and literature is its Ilamaithiram, the ever remain afresh nature. I think the reason for this is the smartness and scholarship of Tamil poets who thoroughly understand the nature of the language and also Tamil sounds. No one could deny that the poets knew how to use right words in right order when they write a poem or a verse. I'd like to share two examples from Kamba Ramayanam. When Kamba describes how Surpanagai walks, he says, Panji yolir vinju kulir pallavam anunga senjaviya kanja nimit seeradiyalagi அஞ்சொல் இளமங்கை என அன்னம் என மின்னும் வஞ்சியன நஞ்சமென வஞ்சமகள் வந்தாள். Kaman wanted to show how Supernaga's attitude changed when she took the form of a beautiful, gentle, demure young woman. To show this change, the major sounds used in this verse are mostly nasal sounds in Tamil. On a contradictory, when he described how Kumbhakarnan reacted when he got woken up to participate in the war between Ravana and Rama. The hard consonants are the prominent sounds in the verse. ஆறு நூறு சகட தடிசிலும் நூறு நூறு குடங்களும் நுங்கினான் ஏறுகின்ற பசியை எழுப்பினான் சீறுகின்ற முகத்திரு செங்கனான். So this is how the poem or the verses go. And I'd like to share the wonderful way how Ramanujan says. I would say these are a few examples to show how and why Tamil is still living, breathing, living language with more than 85 million speakers globally, as A.K. Ramanujan said. Thank you.
Oh, that was beautiful, Dr. Bharathy. You are such a great teacher, teaching to us here, even in this panel. That was beautifully palpable. I'm going to turn to Dr. Janaki Rahman now and ask you, as if you've done so much and you've had so much on your plate over the last years, fundraising for the Harvard Tamil Chair and other chairs. What is left on your to-do list? What else do you think needs to be done, sort of as next steps at your level of work that you've been doing? Oh, unmute பண்ணுங்க.
Not only establishing the chairs is important, but I feel that we have to continue the effort. So last week I was in Tamil University in Tanjavur, met the Vice Chancellor. We had a brief discussion. And what we are planning to do is, just like your student Taylor came here for a few months, every year we will have 2 students from US who is interested, or maybe one of the students that we teach our children. If they come here and stay, the parents won't object to go there and stay for a couple of months rather than these kids taking off for the summertime. And same way, we are planning to bring 2 students from Tanjore University or any other place who are BA, Tamil or honors students, so they could come and stay for 2-3 months under the wings of the big university like UCB or Harvard or University of Pennsylvania, to see how they could do some research articles, because we are very poor in India in these things, as you have seen personally. They have a vast knowledge, but useless except for themselves. To spread it, they have to know how to comparative analysis, how to write papers. And I felt it personally because there is a lot of scholars, but they were all disqualified when they applied for the Harvard chair. The search committee told me they do not have those articles, international articles. And the people who wrote the international articles cannot even speak Tamil as much, but they are supposed to be the scholars. I felt this has to change. So this is the effort I'm trying to do now. As we go, we learn what needs to be done, and this is my next project I'm working on.
Thank you. That's so exciting and so valuable. The Oberlin Shansi is a big proponent of that kind of meaningful cultural exchange, and I think it's great when it can happen in both directions. So that's really special. Well, why don't we turn back to Tom for some kudos, if that would be okay. A few came up over the course of the conversation. We could either do those, or if any of you have a kuro that you'd like Tom to read from his translations. Any thoughts, Tom, on how to proceed?
Well, I thought I would share the one that Dr. Bharathy shared in Tamil, so that those listening can hear an English translation of it. This is from chapter 7 on having children. and she was speaking, in fact, of you, Jonathan, so it seems all the more appropriate. And this is, my translation goes like this. A mother rejoices even more than at birth, hearing that her son commands wisdom. I'll do it one more time so you can take it in. A mother rejoices even more than at birth, hearing that her son commands wisdom. Which I think is such a beautiful image of the way that as we learn and as we grow, those are also a kind of birthing, a birthing into our presence, a birthing into our fullness as human beings, as adults in the world. Dr. Janaki Rahman also mentioned the chapter on what I've translated as firmness of action. And there's one of those verses that struck me, which has to do, he was speaking about this vendor of vegetables who gave 50 rupees toward the effort to establish the Tamar chair at Harvard. And I love this verse from that chapter on firmness in action, where Tiruvallur says, "Scorn none by size. There are some like the pin in a great cart's wheel." Which is such a beautiful image for how even something that seems so small, how could 50 rupees matter? And yet sometimes those little actions, those key players, if you will, hold everything together. Scorn none by size. There are some like the pin in a great cart's wheel. I thought I would just share one more, which is a personal favorite of mine. For one of the things that I've learned most from the Tamar language, from the Tamil poets, from my friends, particularly in the village, about the power of compassion, which Tiruvallur describes as eyes that are moved, the ability of eyes to be moved emotionally, to be able to stand in another person's shoes, and how this connects not simply to our own well-being with each other, but to the very existence of the world. And the first verse from the chapter on eyes that are moved, the poet says, and I'll do this in both the translation and in Tamar. The astonishing beauty of eyes that are moved because it exists. This world exists. கண்ணோட்டும் என்னும் கழிப்பெறும் காரிகை உண்மையான் உண்டிவ்வுலகு. The astonishing beauty of eyes that are moved because it exists. This world exists.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much. So beautiful. I think that's probably a good point to start wrapping up, unless any of our panelists have any final comments or burning questions at the end that they'd like to share. Tom and Shankar and Dr. Janaki Rahman and Dr. Bharathy, thank you all especially for coming and sharing with us this evening, and to all of the attendees, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. Remember to check out more about Shansi on the website, shansi.org, and they have there's a listing there of other events that are associated with the India's 70 celebrations. And don't forget to check out Tom's new book, which you can easily find online and purchase your own. So thank you all again for coming, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.